Hey, Evelyn, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Courtney. I live in California and was brought up in Montana. And in my last 10 years, I've been writing memoirs. And I have to say, it's the most marvelous thing. Um, but it's all about being my life. And it's brought a lot of meaning to me and to others through the books that I've written. And uh, because I really believe there's nothing like memoirs to discover how you became who you are today and to guide you on your path as you age. I also spent 32 years working in K-12 education and did some university teaching. And very much value learning. And so being on podcasts and being interviewed and writing and meeting people when I go out and speak, I just keep learning from the people I talk to also. Um, also, I really believe being brought up close to nature in Montana. I grew up in a very small little town, Ismay, Montana. Its claim to fame was one year, I don't remember which year it was, when Joe Montana, who was a quarterback for the Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs, a radio station there asked a town in Montana to change its name to Joe. And my little town did change its name, and they got a nice city hall out of it. So that's Ismay, and I was there until I was 16 when my parents moved us all five kids to California, and that's where I've had most of my career. And from California, I spent time a summer in Mexico and then 2 years in the Peace Corps in Peru. Met and married a Peruvian university student, married him, and then we came up here. So the second book is about that. So I really feel that looking at my life and looking at other people's lives, especially women, because there are far fewer biographies and memoirs written about women, really have something to teach us. So that's a long explanation, but there's lots more behind it.
Love it. I would love if you could tell us more about what your books are about.
Okay, the first one is called Between Inca Walls, a memoir of oh, a Peace Corps memoir. And it is about some of it's growing up in Montana, because I was looking at how I came to join the Peace Corps or even be interested in other cultures. I now have traveled to about 110 different countries, and I've lived in three of them for periods of several months to 2 years. And I wanted to kind of see why I would do that. My siblings didn't take us the exact same path or even similar. My youngest brother, I'm going to digress a bit, does live in Mexico, has lived there for over 30 years, and is married to a woman in there. And he's a musician, and he has had a very good life as a musician, which he could not have had here. He has always earned a good living. So in the family there is some interest in other cultures, but I really pursued it, and I really value the fact that I married somebody from Peru. I dated a lot of American guys, but there was something about Latin guys you'll see in my book that I just was really attracted to. So the first book is about my route through my childhood, volunteering in Mexico in a small Mexican town for a summer. And then most of it is the time that I was in the Peace Corps. I worked in community development. And I think it's a few chapters in, maybe a third of the book in, is where I meet Antonio. And then you can see it's a coming of age story, really, because I was raised in a very Catholic family and um, adhered to all the rules and regulations until I met Antonio. And so you can see where that goes. I mean, it says on the back of the book that I became pregnant and then we married, so that's no big secret. But writing the book helped me very much overcome the shame of that, because certainly where I grew up, and it's gotten to be much less of a stigma, but that was definitely, being pregnant before you're married Somebody coined, a friend of mine who was also in the Peace Corps in Tonga, coined my book from a. Let's see. I'm trying to remember the first part of it. From a marriage. What do you call a shotgun marriage to a bullet? From a shotgun to a bulletproof marriage. So shotgun marriage to bulletproof marriage, because I've been married 58 years now and quite happily. So that's what the second book is about. That one is called Love in Any Language, a memoir of a cross-cultural marriage. And that goes into what it was like for me to bring somebody up here who hadn't finished his education, didn't really have a career. I don't know that he had had any jobs before we came up, and I was pregnant with our first child. So I got a job within 2 weeks after being back in the States, and then he came up a few months later. And it's kind of a roller coaster ride of marriage and of understanding and coming to appreciate another culture. I already did appreciate the culture, but when you're married to someone from another culture, there are a lot of misunderstandings. Besides getting used to being married, I have always been a pretty independent, headstrong woman, and so anyway, it's a study.
Love that much.
Yeah, what I say is that my time in the Peace Corps helped me see more of what I might accomplish in my life, and even when I hit some detours, because I really believe the more obstacles you encounter, you work through them, and then you come out stronger on the other side. And so that's pretty much my life path, which is laid out. And I am writing a third book about some of my travels, but this one is a lot harder because I can't just get by with saying, well, I went here and I saw this. It's got to have a theme to it, like the other two do.
Love that. What inspired you to write your books?
First of all, when I was a child, I read a lot. And I think I just naturally took to books. Like I said, my town, Ismay, was about 200 people. And while the school was open, it was a first through 12th grade school. It was fairly new, a 2-story brick building. When our family left and took their 5 kids, they had to close the school. There weren't enough students to keep it open. That shows you how small it was. But while we were there, I was there from first. Well, I went to grade school in Ismay, and one summer, my mother got them to open up the school library, and I just checked out book after book after book, and a lot of books that I wouldn't normally read, a lot of classics. The library was really well filled with good quality books. And I read things like Ivanhoe, and I think that's where I started reading the books by Schallenberger, Captain from Castile, and I read all of his books. And then and I would write too. I got rewards, like I had a big imagination. Sometimes it got me in trouble. I was ostracized from that school one time for something I had said. I mean, people just, really ostracized me. The kids did. And that I think I'm going to put on my website pretty soon, the story of that. So in how I wrote it is I started chronologically, and this chapter about being ostracized by the kids in school, my editor and I worked on for a long time, because when you start a book, you have to have a hook, and the first line, the first paragraphs, the first chapter especially have to really captivate the reader so they want to continue working. And we worked on this incident. And then when I went to put the book together, those 2 chapters did not fit. They just didn't fit. So I'm going to take them out and put them on my website. And my local chapter of Fremont area writers I think they're going to put it in their newsletter. But anyway, partly I was encouraged to write by joining the Fremont Area Writers, which is a branch of the California Writers Club. We have 2,000 members, and we bring in people who tell you how to write. because although I used to like to write in grade school, and my parents would laugh at my imaginative stories about witches in the hills on our way to church. We drove 18 miles to church, and I would imagine that there were witches in the hills and write stories about them. But and then when I moved to California, my English teachers assigned us to write, and quite often they would read my writing in front of the class, which both embarrassed me as a teenager and, made me proud. So I was encouraged then, but I retired many years ago and just started writing and could not stop. I just love writing, and it gets easier the more you learn how to write, and the more people enjoy your books, or what you write. I write articles too, and I have a chapter in several books, anthologies, things, and the more you get feedback like that, the more usually you're encouraged to write. It's not real easy, but writing about my background is as a psychologist, so looking into myself and seeing who I am kind of came naturally. That's a long answer to a short question.
Love it.
But
When
maybe you found that writers have a lot of words and they use them when they are interviewed.
I love it. When writing your book, who are you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
Well, it was mainly for me. But my first book, as I was writing it, I was thinking it was going to be for my children. But my husband is a very private person, very introverted, and I knew I'd be writing about him. So I discussed it with him, and he said, "Well, I don't want you to write about me." Well, I mean, how am I going to write about my life without writing about somebody who's been part of it for 59 years now? And so we compromised, and I said, "Well, I'll change your name." So I changed his name to Antonio. Well, my boys have a hard time reading the book with somebody else's name in it. I mean, they know a lot of the incidents in it because I probably mentioned it to them over the years, but reading somebody else's name, they can't. But the name really fits well. It really is much better than his original name. And
Love
my second book really was a lot for me. I thought, well, maybe my husband would be interested. He's not a big reader. He studied physics and math, and that's his world, and that's okay with me. And probably it's better because then he doesn't know what I put in there about him.
You touched on this, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Well, taking a class. I'm a lifetime member of the National Association of Memoir Writers. That's namw.org. And Linda Joy Myers is a therapist and a writer. And I read her memoir, and then I started taking classes with her just as soon as I had retired. And in the beginning, I remember because I was getting feedback on what I was writing, and other writers really know a lot about writing, more than I did when I started, but they're also very encouraging. And so I'd say I started around 2002 really writing. And I had kept journals when I was in the Peace Corps, and whenever I travel, I keep a journal every day, what has gone on. I did keep diaries for one Christmas. I think my parents or somebody gave me a diary, one of those that locks. And I started writing it when I was in high school. And I have those. And when I read them, mostly what they don't say what my feelings were. They say, the football games I went to, and mostly they say, I bought this dress or I bought this pair of heels, and you wouldn't believe the prices. I mean, this is like in the 1950s, and like a pair of heels cost me $4. And so it's filled with what I paid for things. And I had to discipline myself to keep those kind of things out of my memoirs. I still put quite a bit in just to show people how prices have changed, and sometimes it's significant. But so now I forgot your question. Um,
What made you really sit down and start writing?
Oh, yeah, I guess because it was so satisfying and because I was getting feedback and I was taking classes. I took a lot of classes, and particularly the editor for my first book and 2/3 of my second book, she judges contests, fiction contests, and she knows what how to say things. Like, you can't use too big of words if you want the public to be able to understand what you're saying. And I had gone on and gotten a doctorate. I have quite a bit of education, and I was used to writing academic papers. So it really took some change to write narrative. And for that, I took lots of classes. And I think that's what encouraged me. Once I got the hang of it, I really enjoyed it. And then especially writing and looking at who I was, it just, I can't believe that not everybody wants to do that. But I think maybe you reach a certain age and you like to look back and see, how did I end up here and not some other place? Or I particularly look and see, well, how am I, has my life been different than my siblings? And why did I, go into the Peace Corps and they didn't, kind of a thing. And so so yeah. So that's why I keep writing. I can't stop. And reading. Reading is very important. I recently cut back a little bit on my writing, but so that allowed me time to read, maybe a book every 2 weeks, definitely one every month. And I always write a review. And let me say that it's very important. If you read a book, just take a few minutes to write a few lines, put them up on Amazon, because that's another encouragement, what people have to say about your book. You can be totally honest. But both my books rate about 4.7 out of 5 stars on Amazon and Goodreads. So that's encouraging too. That means people like to read what I write.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Well, I am not one of those people that has a set schedule. I mean, I'm not a real organized person, so I fit it in wherever I can. And like if I'm getting anxious about something or have a lot coming down on me, there's nothing I like better than to either rewrite what I've already written. I love editing, and I edit other people's papers too. Um, or writing. The hardest part, and I fit it in when I've got maybe several hours to do it, uh writing the first draft. The first draft is the hardest, but then you write and you rewrite so that you hone your writing to make it more interesting. And there has to be conflict, and there has to be a reason why people will go on to the next page. And that's a real conundrum. And so I fit it in. I can't say I even write every day, but like sometimes I'll use it as something as a reward. I wanted to do something else, but I belong to a co-housing group, which I can talk about maybe later. But and I needed to write an article for the local newspaper, and I was putting it off and putting it off. And finally, I said to myself, if I get this article done and send off for somebody, so somebody could critique it tonight, then I can watch a certain program on TV. But I don't watch a lot of TV. I think that helps with the writing, gives me more time.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Do you know, I do all my writing sitting in my bed on my memory foam mattress. And somewhere on the internet, there's a blog I wrote for another blogger entitled something like, do you get more memories on a memory foam mattress? And I definitely do. And I think it's because it's very relaxing. I have a bed that the back comes up so it supports my back. And I can just sit for hours. When I was writing my 2 books, I literally would sit for hours. Sometimes I could go 8 hours just writing, writing, writing. And a part of that might be because I feel that my life has been a very pleasurable life. I remember a lot of the good times. I also write about the difficult times, but I tended to kind of forget those until I get to that part, and I can write through those. But some memoirists have a hard time reliving, because that's what you do when you write about your life. You relive it to some extent. And since my life has been a very pleasurable, enjoyable life, it's not that hard for me to bring, sit down and write about it. But it's kind of, I think, like playing a sport. Maybe I used to play singles tennis, and you can get in the zone, and you just are, all your senses are geared up, and you just can do what you need to do well. And that's what I try to get to that point with writing, but it takes some time getting into the zone.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
Um, I drink mostly water. I like wafers, whether I'm writing or not writing, and things that I do need crunchy snacks. Um, but I don't recall that I think I do reward myself sometimes. If I finish this section of writing, then I can have a wafer or something. Now, by wafers, I mean those waffle cookies with like chocolate in between. I think that's what they're called. But I don't spend a lot of time uh, snacking, or I mean, I have to get my water in me. So anyway, uh, yeah.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
Well, since I've been writing memoirs, I mostly read other women's memoirs. I was published by a group called She Writes Press, and they put out lots of good memoirs by women, all different topics. And so I have to force myself. Recently, the president of the National Association of Memoir Writers wrote a fiction book. I can't remember the name of it, but um, it's just recently out. Linda Joy Myers is her name. And so I bought that book, and I read it because I took classes from her, and I know her, and she has programs every month. The Forger of Marseille, that's the name of the book, The Forger of Marseille, and it's about World War II. And she writes the fiction much like she wrote a memoir. And part of it is, I think, a good fiction writer gets into the skin of her characters. But I've written there's another one, Rebecca, which is another one. They're fictionalized stories, but based on real life characters. So those I do read. When I was in high school and we had just moved to California, I remember one summer I wasn't working, and I read The Robe. No, I read War and Peace. I'd read The Robe back in Montana, and War and Peace. I read a lot of fiction when I was younger. But like I said, now that I'm writing memoirs, I read a lot of memoirs because I just enjoy them. Yeah.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Well, I think reading Linda Joy's book, I thought, oh, I think I could write something like this. And I knew that it takes perseverance, and I mean, to write a whole book. Did you know that 99% of people would like to write a book, but and of the people who would like to write a book, only 1% do. And I think it's because it looks daunting. It takes time, it takes effort. And of course, if you figured out how much you were earning per hour, you would get pennies per hour, unless you have a big name, or for some reason your book is discovered. Uh, and I think most of us who write these days, at least my expectations, I would like my books to sell. And I love it when people say that they identify with various parts of it, and they do. It's kind of a surprise to me, but they will say, I identified with this, and I learned a lot from that. And so, yeah, that's and then belonging to writing clubs keeps me in the know. But I just went to a conference on Sunday, and this statistic was mentioned about how many people dream of writing a book and 1% do. So, yeah, and most people, I find most people's lives very interesting. I always am asking people about their lives. And I often say, gee, that would make such a good book. But you have to have a certain amount of desire and discipline to do it, I think.
Love that. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
Well, my mother didn't allow us to buy very many of the comic books that were popular when I was growing up, like Veronica and Archie. I don't even know if they exist anymore. But she would let us buy, or she would buy for us, treasure chest, I think they were called. They were classic stories put into visual form. And Treasure Island, I remember, was one. But then I would also go and read those books, and of course they were assigned in school. So, you know, my elementary education was a long time ago, but like I was saying, I can visualize the library, and I can remember going up on the high shelves and reading Ivanhoe. And then if there were other books that were recommended in that book, I sometimes would check those out or get those. But The Robe and mm, almost any classic, well-written book I read as a child. I am much more particular as an adult now, because there are a lot of books that just are not that well written. And maybe it's because that 1%, or maybe the other percentages, they're trying to get their books out. They are writing their books, but some of them are really hard to read. Like, for example, you can't take your journals and just put in a book what your journals say. You have to take out the important parts that you want to emphasize in that particular book. So in both of my books, I left out a lot about my life. But you can write articles, you can write short stories, you can do all kinds of things with the remainder of those things. And you have to, I'm always looking to see, what would a reader reading this think, or what would capture their interest. And then, of course, there are people that write about the various themes of the day. And you can't do that when you're publishing, because it takes years to get the book published.
On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
I put out anything Ann Patchett writes. I met her in person when she put out The Dutch House, and got a nice picture of her with me on that. She is not only an excellent writer, but an excellent speaker. And I remember watching her when I went to a book signing when she came out with The Dutch House, and how she weaves her talks into vignettes, very interesting little stories. Human beings love stories, and we have from time immemorial. I mean, sitting around the campfire telling stories, and you can't say I did this, I did that, I did that. It has to work into a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so I always read whatever she puts out. Let's see if there are other writers. Well, because I like to travel, I had read Eat, Pray, Love, and I've read a number of her subsequent books, but I don't think I've read the last one, and that can't remember her name. I know it. And I spent quite a bit of time reading the writing of fellow writers. I belong to critique groups. If you are a writer, you need other people to read your books, especially if they're memoirs, because when you're writing a memoir, you have an idea, usually fairly clear, of what happened. Now, there's what actually happened, there's what you remembered what happened, and then there's what you write that happened. And they can be very different things. But when I'm in a critique group now, and we read each other's writing, and then we comment. For example, if every sentence starts with an I, or I learned a lot from my editor. You start with the most important part. You want to capture the reader's interest. So I tend to be very particular about the kind of books I read. And if a book doesn't capture my interest, I don't. Sometimes I force myself to keep reading it just to see if it gets better. But I don't. I'm very honest in my reviews. So and reading a book is very subjective. I mean, the things that I like, somebody else might not like. So yeah, I don't write my books to appeal to a particular group, but a lot of former Peace Corps volunteers have written their books. Some 500 of them have written their own memoirs, and I tend to read theirs because I like to compare their experience with mine. Like I said, I'm trying to remember other authors, but they don't come to the top of my head. I'm reading another book right now about somebody I met in She Writes Press. A lot of She Writes Press books I will read.
Love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Well, I'm disappointed that they tell me a lot of the younger generations, millennials and people, don't read books. They listen to podcasts. Now, I used to listen to books on tape when I had to commute an hour to work, and I loved that. But I don't do that anymore. So what did you say? What would I tell? What was the
Someone just starting out with reading again.
Well, I would look at my interests and see what might capture my interest. Like if you like the pioneer days, when I was a child, I read Willa Cather, a lot of her books, and books about the pioneers. I loved those books. And then I tried writing my own book about the pioneers, but I didn't get very far. But look at your interests, and I look to see what my friends are recommending. Uh, yeah, I take recommendations from other people. If people I know and respect say, "Oh, this is such a good book," then I will read those. Trying to think of because I was in Peru and I've been in Mexico, I look for books written by people from those cultures, and if they're in English, then I will read those. I read a variety of books. I'll try almost anything. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many books I have in my house, and I'm going to be moving to co-housing in a few years, and I need to do something with them. But I can't bear to have books destroyed. So what's great are these little libraries that people put on their lawns, and you can put your books in, and then you take books out. Those are great. So I would recommend people look around their areas for something like that. And if there isn't one, build one and put it in your front yard.
Love that. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
I, of course, I'm partial to memoirs, and there are people who are fairly young who have something to say about what they've learned and how they see the world. And I would say, maybe look at people that you admire. Now, if you have a big name, if you've been an actor or an actress, and you you have name recognition, you can get by with writing any kind of a book, and that's not fair. But because some of their books are not really particularly well written. I mean, they're just hard to read. But I would say go to the library and see what attracts your attention. I remember walking into a Barnes and Noble, which we don't have in our town anymore. They closed years ago, and seeing I'm trying to think of the name of the book. I know it starts. I'll think of it in a minute. Where she sees her mother dumpster diving in New York, the glass castle, And I had seen the sequel to The Glass Castle, the second book she wrote after that, at Barnes and Noble. And I looked at the blurbs and I looked at who had endorsed it. And I thought, okay. And so I bought the second book. It was something about horses. Um, and then because I liked that book, I looked at the front and I said, oh, she wrote The Glass Castle, not knowing that it was a very popular book. Um, and I loved it. And just recently I saw the movie. I had heard that there was a movie, but had never seen it. And the movie is very good, very true to the book. One of the few that's very true to the book. But there are other books like Educated, these memoirs that are put out there that are very, they're not that I can identify with the experience of the women in those books, but they have had very interesting, very traumatic, in many cases, lives, and they are able to write about them in a very appealing way. So I would tell people, go to your nearest independent bookstore and see what captures your attention and what's been recommended, or if there's a particular area that you like to read that. There's nothing like spending a day in another world. Every time I read a book, I learn something about somebody else's life and world that I didn't know before, and that enhances my life.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Oh, well, I have had people come up to me at conferences and say, oh, I feel like I know you so well. And I'm thinking, oh, now why? Did I do a workshop with them? I'm racking my brain. Well, it turns out they've read my memoirs, and that's how they know me. Um, but what? Oh, I don't know. Say that. Ask the question again.
What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Oh, probably that I was very religious. I was brought up in a very, and that I got pregnant before I was married. I think that shocks them. I think they are surprised to learn about my husband because he's very, he isn't really outgoing, and the book I think describes him. I think in the first book it describes him in very positive terms because I was falling in love. I didn't know what love was, but I was falling. They are surprised that I did so many things and overcame so many obstacles, financial obstacles, and I mean, my parents were shocked when I came home married. We married in Peru, and then and I wrote them a letter saying, by the time you get this letter, I'll be married. And I had mentioned my boyfriend. I did call him that. I just said I've met this guy, and I would talk about him. So my mother had an inkling, but they didn't expect that I would be married. So I think the reader and people are kind of shocked that I did that I did so many things on my own from the time I was 12, probably. I learned a lot about who I was. I was sent away to high school, to a Catholic high school, and I lived in apartments, usually with a roommate, from the time I was 12 until we moved to California when I was 16, and then I lived at home when I was 16. But by that time, I already knew a lot about my abilities, I think, and I think that helped. I also have a belief that growing up in nature or being close to nature, you learn a lot about yourself. I don't know how that happens, but it's a very positive effect. And so I think people, let's see, what are they shocked? This pretty much covers it. They don't usually tell me what they're shocked by, so I wouldn't know. But they do write reviews that say, oh, how brave I was, or something. I mean, when you are living your life, I don't think you consider something brave. You just do it. And then when you look back on it, you think, oh, I took so many risks. And I do give a lot of talks these days on, particularly to women's groups, about risk, responsibility, and resilience. And in doing that, I look back at the women who got us the vote, and they were not supposed to be doing a lot outside their homes in the 1920s, but they did. They risked. So I really believe the more you risk, just take a chance on something. um, that the more you learn, and I don't regret the risks I've taken. I don't know, I suppose if they're foolhardy, but some of my risks have been fairly foolhardy too. And don't even regret those. So, yeah, that's what people remark on is, what a full life I've lived, which I agree.
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
No, I just like to encourage women, especially to write about themselves. I mean, they can start by just journaling what they think and what they feel. It doesn't have to eventually work into a book, but I think it really helps to I find it very therapeutic. Is just writing about things. If I've got a problem, I'll write it about it. I've taken courses where you do that just to get out something that is bothering you, and it is very effective. Um, and I think having success at being who you are, who you authentically are, once you've discovered, who you really are, having success gives you self-confidence to overcome the obstacles you might find, and then having a purpose. And my time in the Peace Corps helped me see more of what I might accomplish in my life, even when I hit detours. And it's just so interesting, I think, to lay out your life's path, even if you're younger, to just look back and see how you made certain decisions. So I think that's about it. And then read memoirs, write reviews, that kind of thing.
Love that. Where's the best place for readers to find your books? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, I have a website, and they can write and ask for a book. My books are available anywhere books are sold. Sometimes you have to ask for them. I encourage people to go to their independent book store and ask for the book. But the fastest way, of course, is Amazon. And my books are ebooks on Amazon also. Um, and they're and let's see, bookstores. Yeah, just bookstores and Amazon, and then they could order the second book through me. I don't have a whole lot of copies of the first book. The first book was bought up by people who traveled to Peru. I know one group bought 400 copies at one time, and because they were going to Peru, and they put my book right next to a big Peruvian writer, and I thought, wow, I've hit the big time. And the second book, I really would encourage anybody thinking of marriage, going through marriage, marrying someone who's different, and really everybody who marries, you marry somebody else's culture, even if it isn't in a foreign land. And you can learn a lot from the second book, you know, by reading that one. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.